Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
This episode is sponsored by Jewish Big Brothers and Big Sisters of LA.
So when I hear that people are interested in signing up to be a big, I just want to go give them a hug and tell them it's the best choice you'll ever make. It's the best way to make an impact and to be with someone and trust the process. Know that Jewish Big Brothers, Big Sisters puts it together in a way that it makes an impact for everybody. And that connection for me is everything.
If I had to choose one word of what it was like to have a big, it would be awesome.
Just do it. Sign up for it. Everything that you're going to do is going to be more than you can imagine.
If you want to make an impact on a child's life, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of LA is accepting applications today. Go to jbbbsla.org. That is jbbbsla.org. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. And with me today is the Vegan Rabbi, Rabbi Akiva Gersh, hailing all the way from Israel. How are you today?
Doing very well. Thank God. Thank you for having me here. Great to be here.
I'm glad we finally got this going. I was trying to get a recording around high holidays, and then of course high holidays being high holidays, they got in the way. But we finally got it going, and we're exploring a topic that's near and dear to my heart. This is actually less so about what my followers have asked about, because my followers on the Bad Jew WhatsApp community, if you're interested in that, you should go ahead and email us. That way we can add you to it. But, you know, I personally am one of the few vegans there, and I actually am a part of a Jewish veggies group chat. And a lot of the content that fluctuates at that group chat is your content. So, you know, we're always constantly, you know, I would say just relating over the information. Vegan is a very new thing for me. I started this year in March. So exploring the plant-based life and the plant-based diet and how it relates to Judaism is something that I've been very curious about. I'm really excited to get into that with you. Before we get started, we have the 4-minute Bad Jew Challenge, the right of entry onto the podcast, where you tell your life story in 4 minutes. Are you ready?
Ready.
Amazing. Echad, shtayim, shalosh, yalla.
Okay, shalom everybody. Great to be here. My name is Akiva Gersh. I talk very fast because I'm from New York, so it's probably gonna help me with this. But my life story in 4 minutes. Basically, I grew up in a suburb outside of New York City, a classic American suburb. I grew up very, 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 very secular. I knew I was Jewish, and that was pretty much it. You know, a few extra things here and there, leftovers from previous generations. But besides that, very, very disconnected Jewish. They knew next to nothing. I went to public school. It was a very Jewish kind of town. About half the people were in the town were Jewish, like me, Jewish. But, you know, yeah, I like traditions. Again, we did like Pesach, we did Seder, and we went to shul like twice a year, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I guess 3 times a year, because 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that was pretty much it. I went to Hebrew school, which back then was 3 days a week, sometimes 2 or 3 days a week. Unfortunately, it was not very inspiring. It was a bit torturous, and it set me even further away from Judaism. And by the time I got to high school, I was like really done with anything Jewish for sure. By the time I got to college, all right. When I got to college, I was like hanging on by a thread Jewishly with my identity, and then I started to really become hyper aware of the world and all of our world's problems. I came out of the suburban bubble for the first time in my life, went to college, and there's like, wow, like the big world out there, and look what we're doing to it. The big epiphany I had my first year in college was we as humans are destroying the world through our everyday, seemingly innocent actions. We don't know, we don't realize, maybe, you know, we're like innocent, but we're doing it. And that's a problem. And I came from that year, making 2 changes in my life. I became an environmental studies major because I wanted to try to become part of the solution. And I became vegetarian. All right. Which is something I never thought I was going to do. Nobody ever thought I was going to do. I mean, like I eat any vegetables, I eat like hamburgers and white bread, and that was pretty much it. Anyway, a year later, I went vegan for the same reasons. That was in 1995. And at the same time around, I went on a spiritual journey. And in like the 30 seconds I have left to tell this story, I basically was looking for more spirituality in my life, more connection to my past, more connection to tradition. Ironically, thought Judaism had none of that for me. So I did, you know, searched on for like 3 years looking at everything else but Judaism. full circle back to Judaism, specifically through the environmental lens. I was already vegan, I was an environmentalist, and someone started sharing with me teachings about Judaism and the environment, which I never knew could be in one sentence together, that changed my life. Within that, I learned about compassion for animals, not wasting, and taking care of the environment. And so my veganism basically led to me eventually becoming a religious Jew.
Amazing. Wow. Okay.
4
So
minutes.
you nailed it. You nailed it. So it's funny. You and I have like a different approach to our veganism, which is really interesting because you said through your veganism, you became, Jewishly inclined. I have the opposite journey. Because I became Jewishly inclined, I became vegan.
Amazing.
So, my story is that I've been, for the past 2 years since my third trip to Israel ever, where Aish Torah in Los Angeles took me on their Israel trip through Aish Lit, right? I started to realize, okay, like I want Judaism to be a part of my life. I don't just want to, exist as a Jew. I want to do Jewish. I want to have it be a verb in my life. I want to have it be a part of everything I do. And I started taking on these things, and I had like this like middle phase of kosher style where I would allow myself to go to any restaurant. And this is my version of kosher style. So my version is going to differ from your version of kosher style, but it was like this weird middle phase where it's like, okay, I would go to any restaurant, and my intent was not to disrupt how others around me eat. And I'm going to eat only the meats that are kosher. And I'm going to make sure if I'm going to eat dairy, it's going to be before, or I'm going to wait a few hours until I eat dairy after my meat. And so I had like this like middle phase. Well, obviously the food I wasn't eating wasn't certified kosher. I was only doing that. All the while though, I always enjoyed vegan food. I would actually regularly go to this really great Indian restaurant near me in Culver City in West LA that I loved. And there's also a new vegan place called Hello Sunshine that opened up. But long story short is this year I met a person who opened my mind to it, and I had already kind of wanted to try it out for at least a month. And I started it as a health challenge. It was just going to be, okay, how much weight would I actually lose if I went vegan for a month, if I went plant-based for a month? And then I had a friend who said to me, maybe you should like watch some documentaries and do some research before you start this, because it's not as easy as you think. And I did exactly that. And I couldn't sleep that night. And I woke up the next day and I had like this leftover chicken sandwich from the week prior. And that's actually the last piece of meat I've ever intentionally eaten since.
Wow.
I felt dirty after eating that little piece of chicken.
Wow.
And, since then I've been eating plant-based and have really, really come to embody it and love it. And so, I've heard more conversations about vegan in relation to being kosher. And I've actually taken some of your classes. I've been a part of your school that you have, which everyone should go check out at akivagersh.com. But I'd love to know, is vegan actually kosher?
So there's a couple of ways to think about that question and therefore to answer that question. So on the very technical level, yes, full on veganism is completely kosher because it's actually probably the easiest way of keeping kosher that exists in this world. And I've actually heard from people, oh, but how can you be vegan? You're just disregarding all these laws of kashrut, all these kosher laws. And I have to say to them, which should be so simple, but I guess whatever, we're busy, we don't think of everything. Like, these laws of kashrut, of what to, how to make sure your meat is kosher, and if you eat meat, how long to wait before you eat dairy, and making sure the dairy is kosher, and all these different things, all these kosher laws around animal-based food products are only if you eat them, if you want to eat them. Nowhere in the books does it say you have to eat them. Not in the Torah, and not in the law books that have come out since the giving of the Torah thousands of years ago. It's one big if. If you eat meat, then you have to go through this long list of laws to make sure it's kosher. If you eat dairy, all these things you have to do. If you're going to eat eggs, and so on and so forth, right? So it's one big if. So yes, my kashrut is very simple compared to someone who eats meat, dairy, eggs, and all those other things, and that's okay, right? Kashrut doesn't have to be complicated, and I've heard this from many different people. Is like, maybe kashrut is so complicated around eating animals. Maybe God's trying to tell us something. That yes, permission was given, yes, permission is there, but it's not the ideal. And if you're going to go the non-ideal route, then you have to go through all these steps to make sure your food is kosher. If you're going to eat a carrot, it's pretty simple. If you're going to have a salad, if you're going to, quinoa, yes, you're going to have to check the grains, make sure there's no bugs in it, and that's it. Then you're good to go. All right. So that's one thing. On a technical level, of course, vegan is kosher because there's nothing in vegan food right, that goes against the laws of Kashrut. The only place you have to be worried, so to speak, or two places, because of our modern day world and things are coming from factories and the industries, like it used to not be. It's just making sure that your products, even though they're vegan, are kosher certified, because in our world today, there can be cross-contamination because factories are putting out multiple products. So if I have a product, I don't know, just like saying soy sauce, let's say, right? I need to make sure, and I do, that has a kosher certification on it, because maybe it came from a factory that's also dealing with seafood, right? And there's cross-contamination. That's definitely not okay, right? So that's one thing in the stores. And then the next thing is in the restaurants. It's a bigger topic, not really for now, but you have to make sure that if you go into a vegan restaurant, does it have a kosher certification? If it doesn't, it brings up a lot of questions, right? And then everyone kind of deals with that in different ways. I've heard different ways of dealing with it. Some people won't go to it if it doesn't have a kosher certification. Some people say, I'll eat everything. And then there's like a big middle thing was like, I'll eat some things, but not certain things. If I do go to a vegan restaurant, and there have been a handful of times, when I've gone to a vegan restaurant that did not have kosher certification, I'll only eat certain things on the menu, and I'll ask questions of the people who are running the restaurant to make sure that none of those things that have to be certified kosher are going into my food. Again, a bigger topic, right? But that's just part of that first answer. The second answer is a bit deeper, is a bit broader, right? Is vegan kosher? We have to. That's a much bigger story, and something I talk about in a lot of my posts and a lot of my classes that I give over in the Vegan Rabbi world. But let's just look at the Torah. Let's look at the first diet that God gave humanity, right? In the first chapter of Bereshit, of Genesis, right? Chapter 1, verse 29, right after Adam and Eve were created, God gives them their diet. And what is it? A completely plant-based vegan diet, right? In the ink. It's not like in some esoteric, commentary that nobody ever heard of. It's like in the main text of our tradition, right? And in addition to that, we see a lot of laws that have to do with compassion for animals, for animal welfare, taking care of our bodies, and protecting the earth, protecting creation, which God created. We put all that together, especially in our world today, specifically in our world today, right, where our food choices are literally destroying the world. They're causing insane amount of harm, pain, and suffering to literally billions of animals a year, right? Causing so much sickness in people's bodies and causing destruction to the environment. It's like, look at our tradition. We have these ancient teachings that could help us as individuals not contribute to all of that negativity in the world. And that's by eating a vegan diet, which is completely kosher.
Wow. Yeah. So thank you for that. And I know there's different stories in the Torah and different rules in the Torah that help us with getting into the. And yet, at the same time, there are also other aspects in Judaism that are not so animal friendly. For example, our Torah is literally made of animal products, right? It's made of animal skin, if I remember correctly. It's antelope skin, right? Or
it has to come from a kosher animal.
Has to come from a kosher animal.
Right? Yeah. Same thing with tefillin and same thing with mezuzah.
Right.
But there's an answer to that. I don't know if you want it now or later, but
no, because that's the thing, is that there's a lot of compassion towards animal, and there's also the use of it in everyday ritual items too.
Right. Of all the questions, excuse me for this cough, but of all the questions I get from people through Vegan Rabbi, that's probably number one. Is I'm vegan and mezuzah. Like, what do I do? Like, it comes from an animal skin, Torah scroll, tefillin. That's one of the top questions I get, and I say to everyone the same exact thing, and that. There is something, it's not inherently not compassionate just because it's made on animal skin. Let's just take kosher meat for a second, right? For meat to be kosher, it must be slaughtered by a certified shochet, kosher slaughterer, right? Who trained, who studied, whose knives are super sharp, knows all the laws. It must be killed. The kosher animal must be killed by a kosher certified slaughterer with a knife, right? Must be slaughtered in order for the meat to be kosher. The skin that's used for mezuzah, for tefillin, and for the Torah scroll must come from a kosher animal, but that animal did not need to be slaughtered. It could have lived a great, normal, healthy, wonderful life and died a natural death. If a kosher animal like a cow dies a natural death, the meat's not kosher. It's only kosher if it comes from slaughter, from kosher slaughter. The skin that's used for Torah scroll, right, can come from an animal that died a natural death. And that's the big difference between the two.
Fascinating. Okay, so it's not a perfect solution. It's not like there's like an alternative. Although I will mention this, I learned of a company, I believe it's called Vegan Tefillin, if if I remember correctly, where they use a faux leather of some kind, and they make tefillin with that. So I'm gonna ask about that in a second. But I guess, yeah, it's like listen, it's not the answer you're gonna want to hear, but our rituals and our customs are beautiful, whether or not they have animals in them. And so at least you can have some peace of mind knowing that hopefully the animal died a peaceful death.
Right. 100%. And that was the reality for thousands of years, throughout Jewish history. Today, because of our modern day complicated, complex, industrialized, and globalized world, the truth is that most of the skins that are used for mezuzahs and Torah scrolls and tefillin, unfortunately, are a byproduct of the animal agricultural world. That is an unfortunate truth. I do know somebody in America who's he's been collecting, or he was at least collecting roadkill. And so if you have like a deer, which is a kosher animal, if it gets hit by a car and dies, it cannot be eaten. That's not kosher meat, but the skin can be used for mezuzah. Or if an animal, a kosher animal like a cow, died on a farm naturally. So he's been like kind of like sourcing, collecting in that kind of very unique way. It doesn't really work on the massive scale that's necessary to supply all these things to the Jewish world, but he's trying his best to do something there.
Yeah, and I would say that's it's like you would have to, for that to practically work, you would have to really like graze animals with the intent for them to die of natural causes while still giving them a good life, which means that they're going to live longer, which would mean that the animals that passed away died of natural causes, which would make them a higher value because they come a lot less, supply and demand.
Right. That's one model. Another model is having point people all around, let's say America.
Yeah, right.
Even Israel, let's say America, literally collecting roadkill, or having connections with farmers and asking them for their animals that died a natural death out in the grazing fields.
So it's a great nonprofit idea. I think it's a really great Jewish organization idea, and that could be an international effort to supply the Jewish community with naturally deceased animals. That's really interesting. So here's free advice for the next nonprofit advisor, next entrepreneurial feat. But it sounds like the animal products then are necessary. They're very important for the Jewish rituals. Why does an animal product actually need to be a part of it, as opposed to a faux leather like what the vegan tefillah guys do? Which, by the way, I don't even know if those are kosher, and I'll ask about that probably at some point in this episode. But like,
you could ask right now if you want.
Yeah, sure. So I mean,
look, with all due love and respect, and everyone's got their own way, and everyone makes their own choices. I'm not here to tell people what to do, except for them that they should go vegan. No, but really, I mean, I know that's out there. I saw it. I'm aware of it. According to Jewish law, it's not kosher. According to Jewish law, tefillin only is kosher if it's made out of the leather of a kosher animal. And I put on tefillin every day. And I know that it comes from an animal. And there's two things. Again, the first thing I already said, that I know that an animal didn't have to be killed, right? Specifically to get the leather. Even today, and it's not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect. I understand, but it's not like they're killing the animals for the skin. I know that's not a good argument. I know in the vegan world that doesn't go anywhere, right? Because then we wear like leather jackets, and that doesn't work well at all. I don't wear leather. I don't wear any leather. No leather belts. No leather shoes. All my accessories are all vegan. The only leather I have in my life is my tefillin, right? The mezuzahs on my door. I don't own a Torah scroll, but where I go to pray, they have a Torah scroll, of course. So that's one thing, right? And the second thing is, look, we have to also understand the context. Judaism has been around for thousands of years, okay? Back in the day, what you saw around you was creation. It was God's world. It was the world that you lived in. You were very connected to the natural world. And it was also a source of resources, right? Whether it be trees, whether it be animals, bones, skin, leather, all these things. If an animal died, or they killed an animal for food, they're going to use every single piece and part of that animal in various different kinds of ways, right? And make sure that it doesn't go to waste. So I think we have to understand the context that they're living in a very different reality thousands of years ago, where things were much more intertwined and much more close to nature and closer to animals, where today we're very, very distant from all of that, right? So it makes sense to me that, yeah, if an animal dies a natural death and is like literally laying on the floor, and you can use that skin for something, productive and beneficial in your life, why not? Right? You're not harming the animal. You didn't harm the animal. It's now, it died. It lived this life. You can use it. And specifically in the context of Judaism doesn't have this idea. It's a huge idea, actually, in Judaism. I think essential idea of elevating physicality. to the spiritual, elevating creation, elevating the physical parts of creation, right? That Judaism is not about, oh, here's the physical and here's the spiritual. Judaism is about the physical and the spiritual being combined, and elevating and uplifting and spiritualizing the physical. So if I can take an animal skin from an animal that died naturally, take it and make tefillin out of it to do a mitzvah from the Torah, or write the words of the Torah on it after it's been like prepared in the proper way. I mean, that's like a huge spiritual elevation of something physical in this world. That's very, very in line with Jewish thought.
I like that a lot. I've learned this past year about the theme of elevation. Elevation is a very integral part of if being a light in the nations was not the mission statement, the next thing under that would be how to elevate the mundane to the holy.
Well said.
I think that's kind of a really cool and neat idea, and I think that will hopefully give a lot of people peace of mind. I know a lot of Jews who are vegan who are not connected to their Judaism on account of the stigma that comes around the fact that there's animal products that are used, but there's I guess there's tons of controversy around that. Let me ask you this, because people ask me this as well. Okay, you probably get asked this question a lot, but I have to ask it as well because it's a question that a lot of people ask, and that is, if and when Mashiach comes and we get the Beit HaMikdash, we get the third temple, animal sacrifices are back on. So how does that gel with the Jewish vegan journey? And, what will that do to Jewish vegans as a whole in terms of their relationship with Jews?
Okay, very good
In
question.
terms of their relationship with Judaism, excuse me.
Right. We'll need a whole other podcast just to talk about sacrifice in Judaism and veganism. It's a huge topic, and you're right. This is a question I get a lot. This is question number 2 on the list that I get all the time. I'll say it really briefly. There's a lot more to it than I'm going to say right now, but I'll say it just for the sake of time, very briefly. First of all, we have to go back and understand that, once upon a time, Jews had sacrifices as part of their religion. When there was a first temple, a second temple in Jerusalem, and only in Jerusalem, right? There was the Mishkan, the tabernacle before that, which wandered on to different places. Mostly was in a city or a town called Shiloh, about half an hour drive today north of Jerusalem. Anyway, without going into all the details, if you add up all the numbers of years that in Judaism we were offering sacrifices, it's about 1,200 years between the Mishkan and the 2 temples, right? Because between the temples, after the destruction of the first temple and before the second one was built, there was no sacrifices because it could only take place in Jerusalem. And after the second temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, there could no longer be sacrifices either, right? So we have about a third of Jewish history has animal sacrifices. Now, there's a lot of writing about it. There's a lot of thought, lots of different ideas. I think it's important to look at Maimonides, right? Who writes in one of his very, very important texts called The Guide to the Perplexed, or For the Perplexed. He says that we have to understand the sacrifice. I'm paraphrasing and putting it into my own words, but he basically says that we have to understand that the system of the sacrifices in the context of the time, that the children of Israel were living amongst, everyone else in the world was polytheistic, and everyone had animal sacrifice of all different kinds. And there was literally, the Gemara talks about that. There was a desire, even a lust for animal sacrifice back then in a way that we cannot understand today, right? And to kind of tame, so to speak, the lust for sacrifice that the children of Israel had, because everyone was doing it. And that was the way that people served their gods, or their God, in this case. God, according to this is Maimonides, God gave them the system of the sacrifices in order that they don't stray after the other nations, all the other polytheistic nations around them, right? But gave them a system of sacrifice in a very specific way with tons of laws, very specific ways of doing it. And you can only do it in one place. And that was in Jerusalem, only in the temple when the temple was standing. So that's just one context that we need to have. Going to the third temple, whenever it please God, it will be built soon in our day, right? As part of the Messianic era. That's a big question. Will there be animal sacrifices or not? There's been a lot of discussion about this. There's opinions. Yes, no. At first, yes. Then later, no. We don't know. We don't know until it happens. We don't know until it happens, okay? I'll say 2 things, okay? I'll just say 2 things. One, the first thing. I cannot imagine, and I've talked to lots of people, but on some level, it doesn't matter what I think or any of us think, because we don't know. Everything is speculation, right? Until it happens, we have no idea. But I'm sorry, I have a very hard time believing, right, that in the future world that we talk about, that we're waiting for, that we're longing for, that we're working for, when we're talking about world peace and wisdom of God and the understanding of the interconnection of all things in this reality, that we're going to go back to an ancient thing that nobody's even doing anymore. No one's doing this anymore. And we, the Jews, are going to start slaughtering animals on the Temple Mount, spilling blood and throwing animal parts into fires. I'm sorry, in my humble little opinion, which means nothing, I know, I can't imagine that's what's going to happen. That's hard for me to imagine. And nobody could say for sure what will be. Nobody for sure can say, yes, big rabbis definitely chime in on this conversation, and we respect their words, of course, but no one's going to know until it actually happens. The second thing I'll just quickly say really quickly is, this is controversial, okay? I'm not sure if I've ever said this out loud.
Ooh,
okay.
okay.
At least not on a podcast, okay? I'll be straight up, okay? If and when the third temple comes, if there is a return to animal sacrifice, okay, and there is, let's say, the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb offering on the afternoon before Passover begins, where every Jew in Israel had an obligation to eat a little tiny piece of the meat, about that big, a kazayit, a little bit of meat, okay? If that obligation used to be, okay, you eat it at the end of the Seder. That's why we afikomen today, to remember that, okay? But back then, you had to eat a small piece of meat. It was a mitzvah. You had to. It was an obligation. If that returned, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I'm a Jew that believes in the Torah and believes in the mitzvot of God. And if that was an obligation to eat that, I know it's crazy, whatever, and the vegan and a rabbi and vegan rabbi and all this stuff, I would do it if it's a mitzvah, because the Torah said so and God said so. I don't believe that's what's going to happen, though, because today, right, in my life, there's nothing wrong with being vegan. As I said before, there's no obligation for me to eat any meat today. People say Yom Tov, Shabbos. No, I'm sorry. I looked in the sources. I can quote the text. No, there's no obligation. There's no obligation to eat meat today, especially if it's not going to make you happy and it's going to make you sad and upset. Absolutely no obligation. Okay. So all of that together, is my belief is the third temple, the sacrifices are not going to return, but again, nobody knows, and time will tell.
I think that's well said. I think that these points need to be made for Jewish vegan communities, and this is why I really do love the Vegan Rabbi brand. I think you represent a niche that is so important and so essential. I'm sure you've helped a lot of people grow, especially in your classes that you have. And this is something that I really admire about what you do, is that you really do go against the I guess going against the current and being able to state what you must say, and representing a whole people that feel confused and honestly probably even a little bit betrayed by the amount of animals that are used in Torah. And yet at the same time, this Torah also advocates for vegan things. And I mean, like, one thing in my studies of Torah, my menial studies of Torah that I've gotten to experience, that I'm expanding on as we speak right now, is that take any movement that is political or social and try to make it align with the Torah. And the chances are, if you take a quote out of context, you can make it politically aligned with you. But ultimately, the Torah always, for almost everything, takes a middle ground. I've really noticed that. And so what the Torah says here, when it comes to the vegan movement, if you took one text out of context, you could say that this is a totally vegan-friendly religion. But on the other hand, it does acknowledge the part that animals play, and the part that animals have played, and the part that animals will play in the future. And I mean, that's Emet right there. It's past, present, and future. So I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think that's you have to be realistic about what Judaism is in relationship to veganism or any political movement. I think there's something to be said about that. You also talked about the realization of what humans do to the world currently. And that just makes me think of Tikkun Olam, which means repair the world, right? Yeah. So I'd love to know about your values and the vegan values and how they apply to Tikkun Olam and what can be done today.
Well, it's interesting, kind of go back to like the beginning of my story that I shared for a minute. When I was already in high school, I started getting into activism. In college, it took off for me. I put more time into my activism than I think my academic studies, but that's another story. It was a big part of my life. And at the time, I never heard of Tikkun Olam. I never heard of the phrase. And only after I started getting involved Jewishly, I started to realize, oh my God, Tikkun Olam, like fixing the world, that's activism. Like, I've been doing something so Jewish all these years that I never knew was Jewish, right? And the same thing with like my environmental ethics and my the way I was eating vegan and all that. It was so interesting to me that I like, retroactively, I realized, wow, I was such a Jew all of these years, and nobody ever told me that, and I never knew. So yes, Tikkun Olam is a driving force, an absolute driving force of Judaism. You see it. I mean, the phrase itself comes from the Kabbalah, from our Jewish mystical tradition. And when you study the mystical tradition, you see this idea of Tikkun Olam coming up all the time. It means lots of different things in different ways. It's not just like, one thing, but the general idea is that every single day I have an opportunity to do certain things that will raise the consciousness of this world, raise my consciousness, bring more holiness into this world, and through doing so, fix the world, right? Through doing so, fix the world, right? And we in Judaism, we as Jews, we're inspired, we're encouraged to do more good, right? It says in the book of Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, go away from bad and do good. Right? Look at our lives and see what things am I doing that's bringing negativity into the world. Try to stop doing that. And what are things I am doing or could be doing that brings goodness to the world? Keep doing that or do more of that. Right? It's like this double kind of thing. And when we come to our food choices, that's like brings both of those things. Right? Now, nothing's perfect in this world, and especially in our generation where things are so complicated and so industrialized, like we were talking about before. I mean, there's almost nothing we can do anymore. Or anything we could buy or eat or wear that doesn't bring some kind of destruction to the world. If I have a quinoa salad for lunch, yay, it's vegan, but like how many thousands of miles did the quinoa travel to get to me, right? So it's not a perfect food, right? But it's better. We're doing our best. That's all we can be doing is doing our best. But really, are we really doing our best? That's the question, right? What can we be doing more? Always striving. Judaism is all about like growth and forward movement and upward movement, trying to keep growing and trying to do more good than we did yesterday, right? So Tikkun Olam is a big part of like the Judaism and veganism connection, because it's basically saying every single day when I eat, I have a choice. I have a choice, right? I have a choice. What I'm going to buy, what I'm going to put in my body, what kind of food I'm going to make, what kind of food I'm going to eat. And my choices have a huge impact on the world. And depending on what I eat, either bringing more goodness into this world or I'm bringing more negativity, unfortunately, and destruction and pain and suffering to God's creatures and God's creation.
I think that's a fantastic answer. I think we have to think about how, they say that one person is the equivalent to an entire world, right? And when we think about repairing the world, I think we also have to understand that same impact. It's like, well, to save the world, it really relies on one person at a time to work on this. It's very easy to look at this, lean into the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil inclination, and to say, yeah, I'm just one guy. How could I possibly save the world by just changing how I eat? And I think that working on eating in a cleaner way is not just good for your own personal health, but good for the health of humanity as a whole. I think that's definitely something that I advocate for, and it's something I definitely believe in. And just like you, I'll never tell anyone how to live their life, but I will push for the fact that there is a healthier way to eat. And
Right.
it can't be a sin to eat only vegan. So
Right.
here's one more thing I want to ask you, and this is actually maybe even more of a personal thing for me, but also I know a lot of vegans will appreciate this, and that is that you're talking about how to navigate vegan restaurants that aren't necessarily certified kosher but have certified kosher products. Can you walk me through the process of going to a vegan restaurant that isn't certified kosher and making it a kosher experience so that way you can enjoy the food and be able to have more options of places to eat?
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a complicated question. So it's like bigger than what I'm going to share right now. So if anyone has questions, they can feel free to reach out to me. I do just want to say really quickly, just one other thing connected to what we're just talking about, that one of the most important voices in this whole Judaism and veganism connection is a rabbi called Rav Kook, who died in 1935. And he wrote extensively about a lot of different topics, including about animal welfare and what we eat. And there is a text that was compiled from a couple of essays that he wrote, put together by his leading student, who himself was vegetarian, possibly vegan, whose name was Rav David Cohen. It's called, in English, it's called A Vision of Vegetarianism and Peace. You can find it online, free, translated into English from the original Hebrew. An amazing and very important text. And in there, his language is so clear and so powerful about this specific point that, yes, at first, the first diet God gave to humans was all vegan. God then, after the flood and the generation of Noah, gave permission for humans to eat meat. Why? Because we fell morally and spiritually. And time again in this piece, he links eating meat with basic immorality and the spiritual downfall, right?
Wow.
And he says in the future, and this also touches on another question you asked. In the future, we are going to return to the original way that we ate. How can we not? This thing that existed at the beginning of time, given to us by God. Well, wait, it's going to be forgotten forever, he says. We will return to it. And I'm just saying one last thing until I get to your final question, is one of his student of his son, who's a very big rabbi today in Israel, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, who put out like a leading book of Jewish law today. I mean, like extensive. It's like sold like 1 million copies. It's like a major source of studying Jewish law today, called Bnei Halacha. In this chapter about kashrut and animals and animal welfare and all that kind of stuff, he says the numerous laws about animal welfare in Torah and Judaism are to remind us of the immorality of eating meat. He says it himself, the immorality of eating meat, and to prepare us for the future day that will come when we're going to cease eating animals. This is a ultra-Orthodox rabbi today saying this, right? In a leading, majorly accepted book of Jewish law. All right. It's unbelievable. Anyway, we can talk about that more later. To answer your question about vegan restaurants, it is a complicated thing. I'll just give a couple very quick initial simple guidelines, and if people have more questions, they can get in touch with me. Basically, on one level, by definition, vegan food is kosher, right? Is vegetables, grains, nuts, legumes, like it's all kosher. It's all from the ground. It's all kosher. Where do you have to worry about these things, even if you're eating in your own house? If it's grains, you have to check for bugs, rice, quinoa, barley, anything else. You have to check for rice. So the question is, are they checking these things in the vegan restaurant? Probably not. That's one thing. All right. So one thing, if you want to be more strict, you avoid the grains. All right. If you want to be more strict, there are some kind of like leniencies. I'm not going to get into all that right now. If people have specific questions, get in touch with me. Another thing is leafy greens, lettuce, kale, collards, chard. They need to be checked for bugs also. Bugs are not kosher. Okay. So when I have these things at home, I'm checking them, cleaning them really well and checking them, making sure there's no bugs. Are they doing that in these vegan restaurants? Probably not. So when I go to a vegan restaurant, I never get a salad. I never get leafy greens. I won't order anything with kale. Same thing goes with broccoli, by the way. All right. Broccoli also could have bugs in it, and you have to check it. So I won't order anything with broccoli either. That's the way I navigate it. All right. What will I, there's usually lots of other options out there that you can get. I'll just say one other thing you have to be very careful about. There's like, according to Kashrut, like no ifs, ands, or buts about this one. And that is wine and balsamic vinegar. Wine must be kosher, right? And balsamic vinegar, because it also comes from grapes, also must be kosher. So in a vegan restaurant, they might be using balsamic vinegar, they might be using wine, or they might be using wine vinegar, all right? That for sure, I mean, the chances of that being kosher are slim to none, right? So you have to ask, if you are getting something that has some kind of dressing, and I do ask this question, I tell them like in a funny kind of way, like, oh, I have a thing, I can't do any wine or balsamic vinegar. Does this dish have that in there? Either they know, or they'll check in the kitchen, and then they'll come out and they'll tell me. And if they say no, I'm all good to go. Okay, I'll just give one quick little vignette. I was in America a year and a half ago in some random place, no kosher restaurants. There was one vegan restaurant. I went there to eat, right? And I asked like the person at the counter my questions. They went to the back and asked like the head chef. The head chef came out, right? Tattoos, piercings, this cool like vegan chef guy, right? He comes up and he starts spewing all these kosher laws, right? Because he used to work like in a kosher vegan restaurant, and he learned all the different things. And he said, and he basically went, it was so amazing. It was such an amazing experience. And he certified, so to speak, for me that the things I was looking at, no problem, no issue. You can order it. I know what you're talking about. You're all good to go. It was a very cool experience.
Awesome. So maybe this is just for me. I don't know, but like, just to get clarification on one thing here. Wine is only kosher because it's made by Jews, right? That's the only thing.
Yeah, wine to be kosher, right? Because it's just grapes. Like, what can you possibly do to make it unkosher? It's this rare thing in the kosher world that what makes it kosher is that it's produced by Jews. That's the only thing. It goes back to like ancient times when people use wine libations for polytheistic rituals. It's something that still exists today. But for wine to be kosher, it must become made by Jews and have a kosher certification. But it's not only made by Jews, because there are Jews who may be making wine that don't get the kosher certification. If you're keeping kosher, it's very, very important.
Okay.
Important. And balsamic vinegar, because it comes from grapes.
Okay, so it's the same exact thing. It's less
thing, and wine vinegar. Yeah, those are three things. Like If you care about kashrut, if you don't care about kashrut, so you don't care about this conversation. But if you care about kashrut and you want to go to a vegan restaurant that doesn't have kosher certification, that you have to avoid completely. Absolutely.
Got it. So it's really though less about whether or not there are bugs in it, although I'm sure that's definitely important. And it's less about cross-contamination. Again, very important, but still not the main thing. What makes these things kosher is literally because of the tradition of Jews solely making these things.
Yeah. So if you basically have in your mind bugs and grapes when you go through a non-kosher certified vegan restaurant, those are your two guiding principles for the most part. There are some other minutia details, but that's like the main stuff.
Okay. Well, I've always made it a point in my personal diet to only go to kosher and vegan restaurants as of this year. Really as of like the past couple of months, as I've gotten closer and closer to committing to a more stricter version of kosher. And that's really helpful advice that I look forward to bugging the cashier about, no pun intended. But I'll be annoying the cashier, asking them how things were made and making sure that everything's certified and making sure there's no wine or grapes inside these things. And ultimately, I just want to say thank you, Rabbi Akiva, for being on this podcast. What is the best way for people to engage with you, to learn from you, to continue to take your classes? Love for them to engage with you so that way more vegan Jews can rise up and be a shining example as to a great, healthy Jewish lifestyle.
Well, first of all, thank you. It was really fun and a pleasure to talk with you and do this interview with you. So thank you for inviting me on. And the best way to get in touch with me on Facebook or Instagram, Vegan Rabbi, you can easily find me. Instagram seems to be a bit more of the active place, but Facebook also. And then my website, akivagersh.com. I have lots of different links to all different kinds of things. I have a masterclass. I have a singles network for Jewish, vegan, and vegetarian singles. All right. And I also have what's called the Vegan Shul, which we just opened up about 3.5 months ago, which has been amazing, a vibrant online Jewish synagogue community space for Jewish vegans and vegetarians. We have multiple classes every week, live via Zoom. We have a private Facebook group for community building and sharing the recordings of those videos. Every Friday, we have a pre-Shabbat musical and spiritual program. It's been really awesome, and feel free to check that out too.
Awesome. Rabbi Akiva, thank you for being on the podcast. And to the listeners, we'll see you next Wednesday on the next episode of Bad Jew.
Shalom.